Shooting footage in bright daylight is one of the most challenging parts of creating videos. Harsh shadows, blown out highlights, and washed out colors are all common complaints that people have when trying to capture footage during the day when the sun is directly overhead. Now, unfortunately, very few people actually have an answer for shooting in these conditions, but today I want to give you 4 tips that I regularly use to make the best of daylight shooting. So tip number 1 is to use polarizing ND filters. So here we have the Quartzline ND filters from Polar Pro, who were nice enough to sponsor this video and send me a few filters to test out. So like any ND filter, you can use these to block out sunlight to have better control over your exposure. This will enable you to open your aperture to achieve a more shallow depth of field while maintaining a low shutter speed for a more natural cinematic motion blur. Now, if you're already familiar with ND filters, then you may know about some of the advantages. However, there are a few areas in which these particular ND filters completely surpass regular ND filters and, quite frankly, blow them out of the water. Now, the thing that makes these filters unique is that you have the added benefits of having a polarizer built into your ND filter. If you twist the filter, you will notice you can add contrast into the sky, creating deeper blues, more detailed clouds, and better dynamic range. And in addition to this, twisting the filter will also cut out glare and reflections that you see on surfaces, adding significant detail and making the footage much easier on the eyes. For video, I would recommend picking up an ND8 or ND16 PL depending on how much light you want to cut out. So that is tip number 1. If you've got the budget, invest in an ND PL filter. It will make a huge difference. So moving on to tip number 2, let's talk about picture profiles. Many cameras nowadays come equipped with a bunch of presets or picture profiles for a variety of scenarios to help you get the desired information or color you're looking for in a shot. Now, for me personally, when I'm shooting anything during the daytime outside, I will always use a log picture profile. On my Sony a7 III, I like to use S-Log2, which is Sony's picture profile that lets you retain a lot of detail in the shadows and highlights, and it's a really popular choice for filmmakers, particularly in bright settings. The advantage to using a picture profile like S-Log2 is that it can help control those blown out highlights or really harsh contrast that you would typically get when shooting in bright conditions. However, the catch of using a log picture profile is that it's going to look very flat and desaturated out of camera, and now it's your job to bring back that color in post. If you don't have a ton of experience shooting with log, then you might find it a little bit difficult to work with. So perhaps you're better off shooting in a different picture profile that isn't quite as flat, or at the very least tweaking your camera settings so that you can remove contrast and sharpness from your shot, for all you Canon users out there. Now, something worth noting is that if you use one of these filters with a log picture profile, not only does it make it easier to expose your shots, but because it adds contrast and color to your sky, this will make color grading easier as well. So that is tip number 2, play around with picture profiles so that you can retain as much detail in your shots as possible. Now, tip number 3 is to take advantage of tighter focal lengths. When shooting in bright daylight, try to use a tighter lens when you can, or if you're using a zoom lens, you can just simply zoom in. When using a wide angle lens, there is a lot more information in your shot that is now in focus, so this causes things like harsh contrast or blown out highlights to become much more noticeable. However, when you use a tighter lens like an 85mm, the background compression will disguise these imperfections, and this is because anything that's in the background that isn't your subject won't be noticeable because it's out of focus anyway. Now, lastly, tip number 4 is to use the sun to your advantage. The sun is a massive free light source, and if we treat it like other light sources that we use for our videos, we can actually get some good results. This means using techniques like backlighting your subject with the sun, or using surfaces to bounce the sunlight to fill in shadows on your subject. Now, a lot of the time I find the best thing to do is just go downtown and use the shade of a nice big skyscraper to create a soft, evenly lit environment. Now, Maddie Hapoya actually has a great tutorial on this kind of thing, so I highly recommend you check that out. But ultimately, my favorite way to go about shooting in these conditions is to just try everything and see what works. So never be afraid to go out and try different things, experiment with different techniques, and break the rules, because otherwise you will never know what works for you. And on that note, that is it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Follow me on Instagram at daniel.schiffer, and thanks to Polar Pro for sponsoring this video. I'll leave everything linked down below. And as always, I hope you have a beautiful evening.